Good evening, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. I hope you're all doing very, very well. I am back with more Golgari gameplay for you, and we are on the play, and our hand is pretty good. We have a nice three-land spread. The lack of a turn one play is offset by the fact that we can quite easily be happy to play this Quagmire on turn one. We have a very nice suite of threats. Let's hope this is a matchup where Tarmogoyf is good. He certainly is in most of them. Our interaction leaves a little bit to be desired. Assassin's Trophy is obviously pretty nice in one sense, in that it is a catch-all since we only have one piece of interaction. Might as well be the catch-all, right? Well, there's some truth to that. That said, it is a little suboptimal compared to most of our other interaction in the very early stages of the game. That said, this is still a fine keep. We could ask for maybe a piece of hand disruption instead of this, or instead of one of our threats, but totally a fine keep. Our opponent takes a mull to 6. They take a mull to 5. Okay. Now, just as a general thought, of course, you can't read too much into this because any deck can mull. But in general, it's worth noting that combo decks, or decks trying to do really busted things like a turn 1 Blood Moon, or Tron, just to name a couple, they tend to mull a little bit more on average than the fair decks, because we just look for threats and spells in a nice balance, especially game 1, and they're looking for some more specific things. So we're a little suspicious for an unfair deck, and that's all we know. Black Cleave Cliffs into Stixture Supplier. Alright, this is Bridgevine, most likely. I have seen a couple other brews around these cards in these colors, but yeah, that's definitely Bridgevine. So their hit off of Supplier is not one we're particularly afraid of. They did get a little value out of the Gravecrawler, which of course, as things stand, they can cast, but yeah, no Bridge from Below, no Vengevine. That's just what we want to see. Alright, we draw another land. That's a perfectly good draw. And in fact, we'll play that land. Our life total is very important here. And Tarmogoyf is fantastic in this matchup. He usually gets pretty big pretty quick. And a lot of their things, like the aforementioned Gravecrawler, cannot block. So it's not like he can get chumped all day either. That said, they have a very high-value chump blocker sitting across the table at the moment. They play a Painland. They play a Gravecrawler from hand. And another one from the yard. Okay, so they've got the board. They're starting to go wide. As far as things that we are afraid of, we are probably more afraid of like a Faithless Looting or some kind of other effect to give them another crack at getting the really good stuff in their yard. But, you know, they're doing okay, considering the mulligan. And they're going to attack. Now, like I said, he's a really high-value chump blocker, right? So what does that indicate to us? It indicates to us that they're confident that they're going to be able to push damage through. That means they probably have a removal spell for Tarmogoyf, which is unlikely main deck, but I guess they could in theory be playing a couple removals of some kind in a flex slot, but more likely it means they have some really aggressive stuff like the Bushwhacker. That's my read on this. So we don't want to give them the block here. We don't want to give them the death trigger. We're just going to take one. That's totally fine. We're drawing another land. All right, now we're starting to reach the point where we would rather see other things. Unfortunately, there's no effective way to grow our Tarmogoyf that makes any sense, so even though I just told you how big he would be in this matchup, right now he's still a 2-3, which is fine. He still lines up well against their board, and will get bigger for sure. So we'll play his companion, the other Tarmogoyf, and we will get our shock land down painlessly, doing well to preserve our life total thus far against a deck like this. Alright, they're making their third land drop, which is about as many as they ever want to see. They might be a tad flooded, and sure enough, they do have the Bushwhacker. This isn't the worst bushwhacker in the world, but they're still going to chunk us here. There's only one profitable block, and I'm going to take it for sure. I'm still at a nice high life total, so I can block the 2-1 instead of one of the 3-1s, because it's just a permanent answer to that card. Alright, so we're down to 11. Collective Brutality is our draw. Alright, interesting. So we're just going to continue developing our board. We're going to do the very often best play in our deck on turn 4, which is Tracker into Fetchland. We do not have a 1-mana spell to follow up with here, but that's okay. We've still got a nice fat board, and they spent one of their big payoff cards for going wide just to kind of crack in for 8. Now, they could have another, for sure, and we need to respect that. So I kind of compromised here and said, I'm going to crack in with a single Tarmogoyf. It's important to keep our clock up, that's for sure. And again, it's really kind of unusual that the Goyfs are not bigger at this stage in the game, but you know what? Again, he's still a fine blocker here, and we got to advance the clock a little bit. Looks like they're going to just kind of thin out their deck. Ooh, green is interesting. Green might be 4 sideboard cards, and I have also seen some versions play 2 green shocklands in the hopes of being able to potentially hardcast a Bridgevine. I don't know how common that is. I don't know what the exact read on that is, but it's important to note that they do have green mana in the deck. Walking Ballista on 1. And yep, they're going to get the death trigger that we declined to give them. They're gonna force it, and they're gonna see what they flip. They do flip a Vengevine. Alright, they also flip a Goblin Bushwhacker. That's kind of bad for them. And they'll just scoop it up. Okay, so what happened there? You know, they clearly didn't have a second creature in hand, so they were probably not hoping to flip a Vengevine, or at least it was not the optimal flip. I'm not sure what better flips would have been. Certainly Bridge from Below is very, very good in the matchup. That would depend on whether they had any good ways to kill these Gravecrawlers, or anything else in the hand to take advantage of that. Perhaps also a Faithless Looting if they would, hope to get some flashback value. I'm not really sure if they didn't have a second creature for Vengevine what their out was there, but, I think they could have been a little less aggressive with that, if they didn't have the Vengevine possibility there, like, at least, issue some chump blocks with those things before you get the death trigger. So anyway, maybe a little overzealous from our opponent, but regardless, little bit of a strange game in terms of how their graveyard progressed. It kind of cut both ways. On the one hand, they weren't that explosive. On the other hand, our Tarmogoyfs were kind of artificially small for the matchup. That said, they were still fantastic. It doesn't take much to brick wall these creatures, and we were presenting a fairly decent clock. So, but that was only game 1 against Bridgevine. This deck is absolutely insane in terms of its power ceiling. So let's go to our sideboard and see what we can do to try to stop them from running us over games 2 and 3. Alright, my friends, we are back. We're sideboarding. We are against Bridgevine, perhaps the most explosive but not the most consistent graveyard deck in Modern. Unless you count the Gristlebrand combo deck as a graveyard deck, certainly uses it. But in terms of what people think of, like, recursion from the yard, swarming aggro, this is the fastest version of anything like that in this format. And it's a tough one, so we need to really get better post-side. I think if you're not at least considering this matchup when you're building your fair deck sideboard, you are doing yourself a disservice, because it's the type of thing where a lot of the usual pieces of interaction are not necessarily sufficient. And I think my highly diverse 15 ends up keeping me percentage points in matchups like this. In other words, I don't have to choose between playing like stuff against Bridgevine and a narrow card like Choke, because I can dedicate one card, in this case it's going to be Surgical, that's really good against this matchup, and one card that's really good against another matchup, and then I have a lot of cards that are more broadly good that kind of stitch it all together, if you will. So let's go card by card. First of all, this column over here, that's just kind of how the sideboard is naturally separated, but that's where we'll start because they're all guaranteed ins. Engineered Explosives. So kill spells in general are not very good against Bridgevine, but this, of course, can sweep up their zombie tokens really effectively, and killing those in a sweeper-style effect is actually extremely effective, and in a pinch it can hit their 1-mana permanents as well, of which they play many. So Engineered Explosives is great in this matchup. Nihil Spellbomb is also great in this matchup. Obviously, they're a graveyard deck. This does all the usual good stuff of being one-sided graveyard hate that cantrips and grows our Tarmogoyf. This card fits this deck like a glove. However, against the hyper-explosive nature of Bridgevine, at least their potential for such, Nihil Spellbomb is not necessarily going to even be enough. It's better than Relic of Progenitus because you can play it on one and then crack it. You don't have to have another mana up. But even that can still be too slow if you're on the draw, amazingly enough. So that's one of the many reasons we also play a Surgical Extraction, and I might go up to 2 Extraction in the near future. But Extraction also certainly has to come in here. This is fantastic. It's going to take them off of either Bridge from Below or Vengevine, and in our case it's not necessarily like we really want to hit one over the other. It's really whatever they're going off with, we're going to hit it. It also has other targets in the matchup, but those are obviously the main two. Maelstrom Pulse is also great, again, just because it's going to sweep up the zombies. Again, kill spells in general, very bland, very meh against that deck, but things that can hit all of their zombies, very good. Golgari Charm does not quite get there. Doesn't quite get there. It's just not strong enough to kill the zombies, so that does not come in. Fulminator, not the matchup to be land destructioning them. They can function well off 1 mana even. Choke does nothing. Obstinate Baloth, I'll put him in the maybe category for now. It's a body that gains life. It's really surprisingly decent just for those things alone. I have seen Thoughtseizes in their sideboard. That said, the chances that they'll draw a Thoughtseize when we have only Baloth to take, that those approach 0. It's not worth hoping for that, but still a thing, potentially. Nissa is too slow, I believe, as good as she is. I don't think we want the Duress, even though it's maybe a little bit more reasonable than a Thoughtseize, for example. Even that might not be true, because Thoughtseize taking away like an Insolent Neonate feels pretty okay. So I'll just put the discard in its own pile. We'll have to look at the main board and see what comes out as far as that goes. I don't think we're interested in Damnation. We might be interested in Languish. The Wrath effects are pretty slow here, but then again, Languish kills literally everything unless they have a Greater Gargadon, which we haven't seen. It's not in every version of the deck. So Languish is worth considering because it's going to be mostly one-sided. Damnation is not. We don't want that. Kalitas is great. Kalitas is our Grave Hate plus Lifelink plus Threat plus Army in a Can all in one card. He is slow, so he's not going to win the game on your own. You have to disrupt and then land the Kalitas, and then he'll take over the game, but still definitely comes in. Collective Brutality will add to the discard pile. It's maybe even a little bit more appealing than a regular discard just because of the life drain. Life drain's relevant. So these 6 are for certain coming in. And let's see what is bad. So we have the discard to consider and a couple maybe board cards to consider. These cards are out. What do we not like? Sorry, Liliana. This is not the matchup for you. I think that is abundantly clear. Now, Lily the Last Hope, she's a little slow. I still think she's definitely worth considering, or definitely worth keeping, rather. That +1 is just a surprisingly really relevant aggro tool, and they will probably have to direct some attacks against her, so if nothing else, she buys time pretty well. Skooz is going to be fantastic, Tarmogoyf fantastic, all of our threats line up quite well. Tracker is still in the late game, although, maybe for certain matchups like this, I should be considering going down either one Tracker or one Tassiger, probably not both. We don't want to dilute our threat base too much, but these are the slower ones, and I guess in this matchup it would probably be a Tracker, as blasphemous as that may be, because this card is a linchpin of the deck. I could see shaving one, so that's in the maybe board to come out. What else do we not like? Well, it's gotta be some number of discard spells. Let's start by killing all the Thoughtseizes, right? Those are pretty bad. Then what do we have? We have Inquisitions and Collective Brutalities. I honestly don't see the need for Inquisitions, and Fatal Push is a little bit mediocre too. It's worth noting that when they're on the Bushwhacker plan, Fatal Push is just sometimes a way to stay alive. Like pushing a Bushwhacker or pushing a zombie is pretty bad, but sometimes you need some number of cheap interactive kill spells in here, even against a deck like this. Definitely don't like it, but it's a reality of the situation. We have brought in some slightly higher curve stuff as well, so I'm going to cut at least 2. Let's just go ahead and bring these in. Let's just go ahead and bring those in. Now, the discard. So, Collective Brutality, killing a zombie, draining for 2, pitching a card, even Assassin's Trophy is not the best here. We have a lot of really medium cards in the matchup, and I don't know where the hierarchy falls between Inquisition of Kozilek, Fatal Push, and Assassin's Trophy, right? And Collective Brutality for that matter. I'm going to bring in the 3rd Brutality because I really like the life drain. I don't mind it at all. In the interest of keeping the mana curve's integrity somewhat intact, I am actually going to remove a trophy. Even though, it can hit Bridgevine, that's still usually a non-permanent answer. So this was a little unscientific. It could be true that these Inquisitions should all just come out too. Maybe Fatal Push is better. Maybe, I don't know. It's kind of a tough one. So I really liked the first 6 changes that we made, and then from there it gets a little murky. So maybe we need to play this matchup more, but until then, let's run with this, see how we fare post-side. Alright everybody, we are back for game 2. We are on the draw, and we have a lot of really good stuff in our hand. We have 3 different forms of very good Grave Hate, 2 of which double as threats, but of course, we just have to mull this because it has no land. It would be the Madman's Keep if we kept this and just said, hey, we can still cast Surgical. And we're on the draw, so we could hit some lands. Tempting, but yeah. Now I see a hand like this, and I almost wish I had kept that because this hand is very bad too. Now we have the opposite problem. We have too many lands, and our interaction is very poor, and our threat is very medium when it's just taken by itself. That said, this deck seems to do pretty well on keeping land-heavy hands in general, and with Tireless Tracker involved, yeah, it's a consideration. And now our opponent has mulled as well. They'll keep 6. I decide to keep 6. This was probably a mistake. I probably should have gone to 5 in search of some kind of graveyard interaction, right? Like, I probably should have. I see the Field of Ruin, and of course I have to bottom that. And let's see what the opponent does. So, like, the reason that I probably should have mulled to 5 here is that it's not like they either nut draw us or they're going to play a slow, grindy game. and if they play the slow, grindy game, our hand is fine. Like, they're either going to nut draw us and win, or they're going to do really nothing, and then nut draw us a couple turns later and win. You know what I mean? Like, not that they necessarily will, but that's still an option. It's not like they suddenly shift to a grindy value interactive plan B, where our stuff makes more sense. So I probably should have mulliganed this in retrospect, but I'm perhaps a little bit too cautious of a mulliganer, if that's a word, for my own sake. But let's see how badly they punish us. Well, they punish us with the nut draw, so now we really should have mulled the 5, because we need surgical into some good stuff in our hand right now to beat this, almost certainly, and we don't have it. So they get the Bridge and the Vengevine, and they have the Walking Ballista to get it back right away. They have 7 power on board turn 1, 4 of which can crack us in the jaw. Feels pretty bad. And we draw yet another land. At least it is a treetop village, right? Glass half full. Glass half full. Opponent has a Faithless Looting. They're just going off. They pitch a couple extraneous lands. They're just going to get really aggressive here. They're going to just sacrifice a Walking Ballista to make it a 2/2 zombie, essentially. We're going to take 7. Down to 9. Alright, Tarmogoyf's a good draw. We got that going for us. Tarmogoyf was indeed a good pickup. 5/6. See, this is more like it. Turn 2, 5/6 Tarmogoyf. That is far from unusual in the matchup. And he at least can stop this Vengevine in its tracks. They're, of course, just sending it all in. I would not expect anything different here. Tarmogoyf will take the block, and they're going to hit it with a Lightning Axe. Okay. Was not expecting that. That's definitely a bad one. I was expecting to stabilize perhaps at a very low life total while being still really desperately needing to draw some kind of grave interaction so they can't get the Vengevine back, or to get the Bridge out of there. But the fact that they had a Lightning Axe as the last card in their hand means that our Goyf has been taken down. So they get a 3rd zombie, and then they lose the Bridge. Ooh, Kalidas, you're the man. You are just a little bit too slow because we are on the draw. If we were on the play, that might have done it for us, actually. If they bricked for just 1 turn on the draw, Kalidas can start taking over the game. However, we are just dead on board. Even if we trophy a zombie, we are dead. So, not much else to be done there except to say, you got us. All right, well, lesson learned. Don't keep the very slow and grindy 6 just because your 5 might be worse. This is a little bit of a logical fallacy that I myself, obviously, am still guilty of, and many players are guilty of as well. You're going to feel very dumb if you maul that playable 6. Like it was a functional 6, even though it was very bad in the matchup and was almost certainly not going to get us there. But it was playable, it was functional, right? You're going to feel very dumb if you maul the playable but bad 6 to an unplayable 5. Then you have to go to 4, and maybe your 4 is unplayable, and you just say, well, I guess I'll keep this, and you do nothing and die. Especially in paper, you will look foolish. You will look like your deck doesn't do anything. That is a powerful influencer on your decision making, and it should not be. Now, again, we're all human. I'm guilty of this. You just saw me being guilty of it. Your goal is to win. Your goal is to win. Your goal is to give yourself the best chance at winning. So even though I kind of saved face here, both to the opponent and to myself, I was like, yeah, I made my land drops. I had a Tarmogoyf. You happen to have the Lightning Axe for it. I could even show my hand, be like, I was 1 turn away from the Kalidas. It was a lot closer than it looked. Sure, and that's all true, but it was still correct to go to 5 there. I might have gotten an unplayable 5 and just done nothing and died, or I might have gotten a 5 with a Surgical Extraction and an Isle Spellbomb and a Goyf or a Scooz in a couple lands, and then we're rocking and rolling. Then we're going to win the game. So always remember that you want to give yourself the best chance to win, and just because you got to make a couple land drops and play a spell or two before you died doesn't mean that keeping the bad hand was the correct choice. So that rant out of the way, let's go to game 3 and hope we see some better hands. Okay, my friends, we're back for game 3. We are on the play. We asked for a better hand. Ask and ye shall receive. We have a functional but subpar couple of lands in terms of doing everything we want to do on curve and needing to hit more lands for this Kalitas, but it will do. We have the Surgical in our opener, which is amazing. We have Engineered Explosives, which is a really nice out. So let's say, for instance, they go off like they did last game, with a turn 1 Stitcher Supplier into Vengevine and Bridge from Below. Well, we can safely hit the Vengevine with Extraction before they get them onto the field, knowing that we have Engineered Explosives as a way to take care of their zombies when there are enough of them to justify cracking this. So, what an amazing pair these two are in this matchup. We have a couple Assassin's Trophies. Those are a lot more mediocre here, but, you know, they're backup interaction, they're fail-safes. And, of course, we have our ultimate threat in the matchup. He, again, we're pretty far away from being able to cast him, but very, very good. Don't hate seeing that at all. So this is a snap keep. Opponent takes a maul. They maul down to 5 again, and they'll keep. All right. Player tap land and say go. Opponent will fetch. They will shock, and I believe they've had the turn 1 supplier all 3 games, so that's pretty good for them. However, this was their worst hit of all. They got no value in the yard. That is unfortunate for them. But we'll take it. Okay, we draw Tassiger. Now, the nice thing about that draw, even though it doesn't look very good, is that if we continue to be stuck on lands, but we interact, eventually he'll be castable, maybe turn 4. Turn 5 at the latest, probably. So, while it would be nice to get a 2-drop threat there that we could just run out, or a land draw there would have been fine too, I'm still okay with it. I feel very, very safe with what I have in hand. They have a Faithless Looting. Okay, that's a nice follow-up to the supplier, for sure. They get a Gravecrawler in the bin. Okay. They also chose to pitch an Insolent Neonate. Now, that's usually, of course, not one that you choose to pitch, but makes me wonder what else they have. It looks like they're just choked on land. Okay, fair enough. Alright, we're making our land drop. I like it. I like it. And it feels weird, because we're just doing nothing. We're just passing. But, you know, that's okay. We're under no pressure to speak of yet. That could change on a dime. That could change in the blink of an eye, so we need to really conserve our interaction. Okay, they're going to crack for 1 and pass. Alright, Brutality is yet another one that's kind of suboptimal, mediocre interaction. So what I'm going to do here is just simply drain them for 2. Actually not a bad play at all, and remember in the sideboard how I was like, you know, draining for 2 feels pretty okay. I wonder if this is just better than any of the discard spells or fatal pushes. It is right there, you know. Doesn't look like much, but hey, we gained back all the damage they've dealt to us. We put them a little bit lower. If they do find another land, it might be a fetch land into a shock, which is going to put them within striking distance down to 12. More importantly, if we had Fatal Push there, obviously we don't want to spend that on the supplier. That's going to potentially send them off. And even Inquisition here would be pretty dangerous. I would probably not fire it off, because I could have no choice but to take away something that enables them to really go off. So, hey, drain you for 2. I've seen better plays, but, you know, game's a little weird thus far, and that feels just fine. So they find another supplier. They're finding really good draws, but their hits off of their graveyard effects have not been great. Here they just get another Gravecrawler. They also have a couple lootings in the bin now, so they've got the grindy value there, but again, they need lands to take advantage of that. They start trying to claw back the life we gained. And they're passing to us. Maelstrom Pulse, again, a good one in the matchup, but right now it's just gonna be another thing to sit in hand. Looking a little weird, this game. Looking a little strange. They find land number 2. Okay. They've doubled their clock. Yeah, you got it. Alright. Now they've just got they're just going wide. So, couple things here. Number one, maybe the second land wasn't really what's gating them. Maybe they just have a really clunky hand. Maybe I don't know what they could have in their hand. I won't speculate, but they could just have a clunky hand. So maybe they have nothing better to do besides Gravecrawler. Or maybe they're trying to force me to spend something on their board now. Which, in all honesty, I might have to. Now, it would have been... It was a little bit tempting once they got that second Gravecrawler in to spend the Surgical Extraction. Now, I don't think our deck should really lose to just vanilla Gravecrawler attacks. Our kind of clunky threats here, though, make them a little scarier than they would otherwise be. So it's worth considering that line. Still, I think that's a trap. I think we just have to save this for one of the 2 major payoffs. Regardless, they get to get the zombie board nice and wide. Alright, Overgrown Tomb. Got a shock in here, and we've just got to play the Kalitas. Now, this is going to make the game take off, one way or another. Either they're going to answer him, and then they're going to start going to town on us and start swinging in with a real clock, or they're not, and we're going to get to use our interaction a lot more aggressively, because we'll get enough benefits out of Kalitas to make that well worthwhile. So, Kalitas is going to hit the field and say, alright, let's get this show on the road. What have you got? They've got a third land. Okay. They're going to Brutality the Kalitas, which must mean, yep, sure enough, Kalitas gets us a 2-for-1, I guess, so that's a thing. I don't know how I feel about seeing both of those cards in. So, far from a Bridgevine expert, I don't know what's correct. I don't know which of these were main deck and which came in from the side. I don't know how great they are against me, in all honesty. I think they want to stay as explosive and combo-oriented as possible against this BG Rock deck, but what do I know? Either way, they were able to take care of the Kalitas, and maybe they're worried about answering Kalitases and Tarmogoyfs and things like that. So, fair enough, it worked for them, but they're down to 2 cards in hand. We've got a full grip, and again, Liliana of the Veil is one of these draws where, yeah, it's interaction, but with their board, it's not very profitable interaction. And I'm actually down to 7 all of a sudden. So, I am dead to their board plus another one of the spells that they just showed me. Either Brutality or Lightning Bolt does it. Of course, I'm also afraid of Goblin Bushwhacker. I haven't seen Bloodghast, but a Bloodghast with haste, there's a lot that could do it. Walking Ballista for one. I'm dead to a lot unless I take care of this board. So remember in the sideboard how I said, this is in here to take care of the tokens, but in a pinch, it can hit the 1-drops. Well, they've got a full board of 1-drops. That said, this game is about to get crazy when I kill them because they're going to get 2 death triggers. The Gravecrawlers are recursive, so we'll see what happens. But I'm going to start out with the looting. You got it. Maybe they're trying to... I don't know. Yeah, maybe they're trying to do that. Maybe they're trying to get a bridge from below in the yard so they get a ton of value when I crack the EE. Which, to be fair to them, would be the case if I didn't have the Surgical in hand. So they'll cast the Stixure Supplier. Sure. They find another bridge from below. Now this would be unbeatable right now if I did not have Surgical. They would just pretty much be going to town on us. But, well, I guess not unbeatable because I get to crack EE and then I have Pulse for the zombies. So we have backup plans, but the best one here is to just Surgical the bridge. Note how we paid mana and not life there. That was very nice to have that luxury here while still being able to hold up EE. And so, of course, I get to crack that. They get 2 death triggers. They put some Vengevines into the yard, so they have 3 total Vengevines in the yard. They have another Faithless Looting, so they've got still 2 more lootings to flash back, 3 Vengevines. Looks like they're going to get to do some more stuff with their graveyard. That is for sure. However, they're going to give us a window. We were really hoping to draw Nile Spellbomb there. That would have been the nut. Unfortunately, we drew a trophy. So again, we're kind of in a position where our interaction is a little bit medium at the moment, what we have in our hand. At least we get to deploy a nice big threat, however. And we do get to hold up trophy. For what that's worth. So what we want them to do here is brick for 1 turn on being able to get the Vengevines back. That'll give us a lot more time to stabilize. They will start out with a looting. They pitch a Bushwhacker and a Swamp. Stixure Supplier, alright. You're seeing a ton of these guys. They're so good in the deck. They get no value with that particular ETB trigger, however, but they do have the 0 mana Ballista, so here come all 3 Vengevines. It's a good thing Tasigur is a 4/5. That's all I will say. So this is pretty rough. They're going to crack in for 12. We do get to stay alive here, though. We get to trophy a Vengevine. We get to eat another with Tasigur. And then we have to take 4, which is going to put us in lightning bolt range. So we are dead to a lot. We drew a Languish. Okay, we drew a Languish. This is one of those cards that was maybe board for me and did end up coming in. Now, of course, giving them the death trigger off Stixure Supplier is not ideal, but I have to get this Vengevine off the field. Because even if I do nothing and I sit back and block, trade with a Vine, take 1 from Stixure Supplier, that puts me dead to a collective Brutality Drain too. I just have to give them as few free win top decks as I can. I also need to be proactive here because the longer I wait without presenting a clock, the more chances they have to get those free win top decks. So as risky as it is, we're going to start off by attacking with the Tasigur. Opponent perhaps realizing the sudden unexpected value of their 1/1 attacker, declines to block. Maybe also just being generally leery of what we could have. And we have a Languish. So, feels okay. They mill over nothing useful, so that feels good. They're down to 14 cards in deck, too. That's another interesting facet of this very interesting Game 3. So, they're empty-handed, but they could certainly draw plenty. They're going to flash back a looting. Alright. These lootings are proving very good grindy value. They're going to get rid of a couple unwanted lands. Alright, no Lightning Bolt. That's good. We draw a Tarmogoyf. Alright, that's a card. Tasigur Clock is pretty real. It really is. People underestimate him because it's just a natural thing to do for a seasoned Magic player to associate the power toughness with the converted mana cost. Of course, in practice, he's a 2 or 3 drop or even a 1 drop sometimes. But yeah, this 4/5 Despite how crazy Modern's gotten, a 4-5 body is still quite good. A 5-6 body is even better. We'll play the Goy for holding up a trophy. We're still cold to the old triple Bridgevine, but that's not something we can afford to play around. Our opponent will loot. Our opponent will play a Walking Ballista on 1. So they looted away another looting and another land. So they're catching all the lands finally at the end of their deck. And they have no choice but to play this Ballista out as a chump blocker because they're dead on board. However, they're dead on board anyway, because we have a good old Assassin's Trophy taking care of the Walking Ballista, and we will crash in with our fatties for lethal on the following turn. Our opponent, seeing that, will concede the game. It's just worth noting, Assassin's Trophy, very, very subpar in this matchup, but it's so flexible that you just will usually end up leaving some number of them in. And there it proved to be, hey, takes away the chump blocker, gives us lethal. Certainly not the best performing card in the match or the game or anything like that, but the versatility is still pretty real. Greater Gargadon is a card that I did not see in any 3 games, but it's one that they often play in Bridgevine, and Trophy as an out to that is quite nice. Anyway, that was a strange and close game 3. They took a mulligan down to 5. They whiffed pretty hard on their first Stitcher supplier, but as the game went on, they started really getting... They just drew enough graveyard enablers that their good hits became deterministic at some point, and they got all their Vengevines and they went crazy after we surgicaled away the bridges from below. Quite an interesting game. I guess our MVPs were Surgical Extraction and Engineered Explosives, which I kind of pointed out was a likely MVP duo in the opening hand, but Explosives ended up being used in a really unorthodox way, killing 4 1-drops, 2 of which give the opponent a beneficial death trigger, and 2 of which are recursive. And, of course, normally with Explosives you want to just kill their zombies, which are neither beneficial death trigger givers nor recursive. So, an unorthodox use of those 2 cards in tandem, but one that ended up getting us there with some really weird plays, including a Languish against a recursive graveyard deck, and, a really good card in the matchup kind of sitting in hand waiting for an opportune moment that never came. And our Kalidas eating what was essentially a double burn spell, like just kind of a strange and odd game, but one that I had fun playing and that we came away with a narrow 2-1 victory in. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any further thoughts on the final few decisions I was kind of agonizing over in the side, what were we considering? It was Trophy versus Pushes versus Inquisitions. I think Collective Brutality is probably the better of that category, but we could group Brutality in with those as well. If you're so inclined, please let me know what you think about those cards in this matchup. Otherwise, as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the match, and I will see you for the next one. Have a good night.